Food Focus is a website. We started the website in September of 2016, and really the three partners have spent most of our career in the food industry, and so we wanted to create a platform to educate. I've done a number of things, training, auditing, as we all have, consulting, but your reach is limited. And so with a digital platform, we can hopefully reach many more people. So really our sort of objective is threefold. We want to assist the food industry in all sectors to understand what do they have to do in order to comply, how do they do it, and then thirdly, to put them in touch with the right kinds of service providers. So our focus is compliance, and to make sure that the food industry, we're supporting the food industry in that regard. So it's an educational website. The characteristics of listeriosis are possibly make it slightly easier to be able to trace in that respect, because we have this opportunity for whole genome sequencing, which allows us to very specifically identify the particular strain of the organism which is responsible. So this week's discussions regarding the samples that were tested and now have been found to not contain ST6 is in fact one of the characteristics which would make it easier for us to identify the source. I think one of the challenges that we have is the fact that the organism can have up to a 70-day incubation period, although the NICD have said to us that they're looking at about a 21-day incubation period. I can't remember what I ate on Monday, never mind what I ate 21 days ago, never mind 70 days ago. So finding what the patient actually ate which caused them to become ill is one of the challenges because of this long incubation period that the organism can have, can exhibit. I think one of the other challenges, as the NICD have said to us, is it is not symptoms that are normally associated with food poisoning, as we often call it as consumers. In the industry, we refer to it as foodborne illness. I think we commonly associate nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and then we think, oh, it's something that I ate. But in this case, the symptoms are more flu-like, and that is not often immediately associated with food. So the consumer may not even think that they are suffering from foodborne illness. Similarly, the doctor may not consider that this is foodborne illness. I think at the moment we're on high alert in that regard, but the symptoms themselves, I think, are a complicating factor. One of the challenges that we have spoken about, and it's the scientific sort of characteristics of the organism, is that it can grow at refrigerated temperatures. It can multiply at refrigerated temperatures. And so for certain products that have been associated with outbreaks around the world, such as ice cream, processed meat products, leafy green vegetables, those are all put in the fridge. They're put in the freezer, and we put them into the fridge or the freezer expecting that that's going to be the step that's actually going to improve the product or protect the product. Whereas in this case, it could actually contribute to the organism. But that's why it's so important that the consumer uses the best before date. Absolutely huge, and I think as the industry, I just in conversations with colleagues, there is a huge amount of concern with regards to this particular outbreak. People wanting to know what's going on, wanting to understand the process because of this very situation. If we take the outbreaks that have occurred in other places in the world, Jensen Farms, for example, was an organization associated with a very large outbreak of listeriosis that was linked back to cantaloupe melons. The company no longer exists, and criminal charges were laid against the owners of the business. Everyone remembers that organization because of listeriosis, but not in a good way. I think the cost is considerable. I think it's important that any company that is entering into a business relationship, particularly within the retail sector where these requirements are mandatory, they have to take these considerations into account. They have to budget for it. And I think you would probably get a resounding yes from the industry with regards to the fact that it does cost. Food safety is not for free, and I think what's important is that the consumer is not always aware of the investment that a company makes to ensure that the products that they're producing are in fact safe for consumption. There's the cost of the audits, which can be upwards of 6 to 9, even higher, 12 grand a day. You've got that as an annual cost, plus then you've got the cost of the laboratory testing. Every sample that is tested can cost you 100, 150 rand in order to conduct, the microbiological tests. That's over and above employing a food scientist who is there as your insurance policy to advise management, in the correct way. And I think many small businesses find those costs prohibitive, and I suppose inevitably will try to, find ways and means around these things. Having said that, I have personally worked with very small businesses where they have used the resources they have very effectively, and they have been able to do the right thing with very limited resources. There are also larger companies who have a lot of resources and don't necessarily employ those resources in the correct way. But what's the cost of a recall? What's the cost of your reputation? And I think from a business owner perspective, you need to do those sums very, very carefully. When it comes to food safety, we talk about the food safety management systems that we've put in place in order to, as an industry, deal with food safety and in a formal way. If we talk about the formal systems or formal structures, formal sector rather, I would say that there are robust systems in place because they've been developing over the last 10 years. We have the Consumer Goods Council of Southern Africa. We have all of the members of that organization that cooperate specifically with regards to food safety. We in fact have what we call the Food Safety Initiative. That particular sort of function of the Consumer Goods Council was started probably about 10 years ago now, specifically to work in the retail sector and the formal sector to try and create sort of parity with regards to these structures. And that includes the auditing that I mentioned. It includes a particular protocol which suppliers have to comply with, and they have to be audited annually. We obviously have other sectors like the food service sector, where you have particular companies that are very responsible when it comes to their suppliers. I think we have the Department of Health, we have the Department of Food Control. They're a particular sort of department within the Department of Health, and their sole responsibility is the control of food within South Africa, and obviously the control of food safety. I'm sure that they will agree, if I say that they are under-resourced. I'm sure they could do more. I'm sure they would love to do more, but they obviously have limited capacity. We have the environmental health practitioners, which by law have the mandate to ensure that food businesses have a certificate of acceptability, and that certificate is there as our insurance policy as a consumer, that they've got the minimum requirements in place. Again, we have limited resources, and the environmental health practitioners are spread very, very thin in that regard. So those, I think, are areas where we could, as a country, most definitely be focusing more nationally from a strategic perspective and from government's level. That's my opinion. I think when it comes to the informal sector, there is no formal structure, like I've mentioned. Many smaller businesses, if you just had to sort of walk around this square block in Pretoria, how many food businesses exist? They're not part of the formal retail structures where we can rely on retailers to police on our behalf. And so, unfortunately, if the government is not actually able to perform its function effectively, I think there may be gaps in that regard.